developments in digital badging are going to be really interesting. Whether we see MOOCs being used in face-to-face teaching as a supplement and blended learning is something to keep on the back of our minds. Here's a quick snapshot of Aussie MOOCs. So the big players are Coursera, Melbourne University, first guys to finish a course last year, same observation about completion rates. And then edX out of MIT and Harvard, we can see that UQ, ANU and University of Western Australia certainly jumped on the edX bandwagon. And then there are a bunch of players doing their own thing that you can see there at the bottom. So interesting area, let's see where that goes. E-books, e-text. The real challenge, of course, is the cost of text and the number of textbooks that students require in some disciplines. Now, a number of business schools have made interesting decisions to go towards electronic text. MIT Sloan Business School certainly decided to give all of the material as PDFs, essentially. And as you'd expect out of a business school, a business case was done. And they decided that they were saving at least 10 grand a year by doing this in printing costs. It's interesting that Wharton at Pennsylvania University did pretty much the same thing. And they actually tell us that they're saving about 60 grand. So there you are, your third ranking MBA course on the planet, saving 60 grand. But I want to raise a question for you to think about, because we'll be hearing about it from both Nick and Andrew. Is this actually changing learning? What this is just substituting print for PDF, and there'll be more on that later. Now, if we look at the industry, I can make a fair observation that they're not catching up. So you're probably aware that there aren't that many e-textbooks out there. Now, in schools, there is. So in New Zealand and Australia, much of the curriculum have e-texts available. But if we look at what's happened in industry, it's either about e-text that can be used by the iBooks app, which is free, and if you don't have it on an iPad, do download it. It's about people writing apps to be the books. So the Harvard Business Review is an app that you can download and the material will be there. Our friends at Amazon have their own app for the iPad that you can purchase textbooks. And then there are guys like Inkling, a company that actually produce textbooks for publishers that are highly interactive. And a number of business schools have gone for that option because you can buy a chapter at a time, and because of the interactivity that's built into it. And in fact, there are some very advanced facilities like social reading, which means essentially, if a student wants it to occur, anyone on their social network can see the notes they're taking within their textbook when they too are in their textbook, and collaborate on reading. But what I find really interesting is the self-publishing. So Wharton and Sloan have basically produced PDFs. I'd like to identify them as probably the lowest common denominator because there's not much interactivity that can occur with these. But it is certainly a solution that will work on every platform. And for reasons of equity, that's clearly important. Then there's a standard called EPUB, and I'll look at that in a minute. And then thirdly, from an Apple perspective, if folks have iPads, iBooks Author is a software on the Mac to produce highly interactive books that Andrew will show us in a moment. But let me be platform agnostic. EPUBs. Any platform can use EPUBs. Android, iOS, aka iPad. And if anyone's done any web development, the technology there is very similar. HTML, XML, style sheets. You can have some interactivity, you can embed video and so on. Andrew will show you one of these. Folks like Open Universities have produced literally hundreds. The way you do it is you use software, free software like Calibre on the PC or Mac, bring in a Word file, add interactivity, save it to Kindle, save it to iPad. We are part of the industry board that uses EPUB. You can use EPUBs on the iPad. But there are many business schools and others who are using just iPad. iBooks Author runs on a Mac to produce highly interactive books that go beyond the EPUB standard. And same deal, you bring in your Microsoft Word file, you add interactivity, and you then export it to the iPad. You can also save it as a PDF to worry about those platforms that aren't covered off. And those books are highly interactive. And just in a quick snapshot recently, when I was looking at what folks are doing in New Zealand and Australia with iBooks Author, There are numerous titles out there. Across the road at AUT Midwifery, their guide is certainly there, an iBooks author. UNSW, if anyone produces any videos, lighting essentials is usually important. Well, COFA at UNSW have produced a book on lighting essentials. It's just wonderful, the interactivity, the videos that are in there, and all sorts of disciplines, including QUT and the business school. So let me wind up the big picture overview. We've seen a pile of impact when we're visiting folks internationally and nationally, but again I'll hit home the idea that it's all about teaching and learning. I think that's hugely important. The iPad enhances teaching and learning, it does not replace teaching and learning. But there are folks who've made bold decisions. The University of Western Sydney, you're probably aware last year, the Deputy Vice-Chancellor Academic made a call to give every first-year student in all disciplines an iPad. So 9,000 iPads given out January, February last year. Kind of ironic, the marketing poster there, out with the old, in with the new, because that's actually pinned up on the oldest multi-storey building in Australia, which is the female orphanage at the Parramatta campus, but we'll move on from there. They followed through with that decision this February. There are now over 20,000 iPads in the hands of UWS students in Western Sydney. And just a word on that. Why did they do this? Low socio-economic area, first at university, numbers very high. But importantly, it was a strategic decision to trigger change management to move people towards blended learning. That's what it's all about. So resources have gone into putting flexible delivery folks in every academic department to help develop material. Heaps of professional development has been spent. What's the feedback out of this? This is 2 years on now nearly, well, 1.5. Qualitative feedback from a February report is really quite interesting. In midwifery and nursing, one student points out that, okay, the students get it, the staff don't necessarily get it. And this is all about professional development. And of course there are champions. There are always folks who run ahead with this sort of material. James Akavadadis is an interesting guy who actually started in business as a merchant banker with a PhD from UNSW and went on to do a second PhD in sociology and now teaches intro sociology. Teacher of the Year in Australia a few years ago. Boy, has he gone with it. Reinforcing that message I gave 20 minutes ago that a good teacher is a good teacher with or without the technology. What about quantitative feedback? Now, that's an interesting one out of the UWS. This is accessing their virtual learning management system, Access Blackboard. In orange is the iPad, in green is the laptop. For all of the tasks you can see to the left, students prefer using the iPad. That's not to say they prefer it for everything. For submitting assignments, they prefer a notebook computer. I personally wouldn't want to write a thesis on an iPad, even with an external keyboard, but there are people doing it. Some of the feedback we're seeing in other disciplines are interesting. University of California, Irvine's med school and another med school like Leeds, Manchester and others who give every student an iPad. And what I think is really interesting to see with their iMed Ed program is students are just seeing this device as another tool. Stethoscope in one pocket, iPad in the other pocket. But the Dean gave us some interesting feedback. And I'll let you read that. I hate reading slides. The summary, the students are doing better since this program was introduced. Now there's another discipline where they made a call to give every student an iPad. 3.5 years ago, the Dean of Science at Adelaide University made a decision to do this for reasons of equity. He wanted open educational resources. First year in, all textbooks were replaced by electronic versions to bring the cost down 60% of where it was. Wasn't good enough. This year they're moving towards open educational resources, and indeed staff are starting to create their own content. But the feedback from students that Dean Bob Hill shared was that enrolments increased, but importantly, student retention 3.5 years in, each year has improved by integrating this technology. And over 70% of the students find that this technology motivates them to learn. So what are the prerequisites for these sorts of programs to work? There's quite a bit of work out there looking at that, and there's quite a bit of local work looking at that. So at AUT and Murdoch and Perth, in a recent paper, the critical success factors were outlined. and I think I've mentioned most of them already. Timely feedback, infrastructure. Well, let's face it, our friends at UWS in Sydney, if 20,000 iPads are turned on at once, when they started out it wouldn't have worked. They needed to upgrade their network, and that's something all universities are struggling with. So that formative assessment, making sure they go for the right devices, and it's all about pedagogy. Now I'd like to try show you that what UC Irvine are doing, some of the apps they're using, and get you to use the same sort of technology. So UC Irvine use mind mapping software in medicine. And the way they do that is a tutor will get a small group and they'll basically say, right, open up Poplet, which is an app, or Mindshare, and I'd like you to give me a differential diagnosis for this patient. So they might say, patient presents with distended liver and jaundice. The students type in the differential diagnoses, and up on a screen comes all of the feedback. Could be hepatitis A or hemochromatosis or whatever. We're going to try similar experiments. So assuming that you followed the directions to jump on a network, be it a university network or EduRoam or your own network, I'd like you to think about this statement, incomplete statement, which is, excellent student learning occurs when? I'd like us to use a platform-agnostic tool that comes out of Curtin University. It's called GroupMap. And GroupMap's just a website. So what I'd like you to do is log into this URL, www.groupmap.com. And when you've done that, just a thumbs up. This is a good test of university infrastructure. So looking for thumbs up, got 1, 2. I'm going to wait for a statistically significant number, maybe 15. 3. So here we go, no rush. But this is it for. We're just seeing how folks are using this material. I've seen it being used in creative writing, where students watching a film on would actually pop up ideas. Okay, that's about 10 folks. Great, okay, so their infrastructure's up to it. Well, it asks for a password. That password is